Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Ohio Chapter American Academy of Pediatrics and the Ohio Parents Advocating for Vaccines webinar focusing on the state of vaccine criticism. This webinar will be recorded and housed on the PA4V resource page. Following this webinar, I will be sending the link to the recording along with instructions on how to become a member of PA4V for those who are not already members. Please mute your line so that we do not have any interruptions for the recording. Please use the chat feature to ask any questions or to provide comments throughout the presentation. Our speaker today is Erica DeWald. Ms. DeWald is the owner of Coffee House Communications and serves as Vaccinate Your Family's Director of Advocacy. She leads VYF's efforts at both the state and federal level to educate legislators, media, and the public about the value of vaccines. She has developed relationships with immunization partners throughout the nation to ensure that VYF's work supports grassroots efforts to ensure effective vaccine policies at the state level. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Erica.
Thank you so much, Lori. It is a pleasure to be here today. I will say I don't have the ability to share my screen, so I don't know if there's a way to unlock that or if it's just easier for you to share the presentation. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. And while I pull this up, my son would like you all to know that yes, you may, that he fully vaccinated me today, including against coronavirus. So call the CDC. We've got the coronavirus vaccine here.
Awesome.
Okay, so today I wanted to talk just a little bit about the state of vaccine criticism in the country, what's happening in Ohio, and how we can do a better job in gaining non-traditional partners in this area. So the first thing to know is who are the key players in the anti-vaccine world. Some of these names will look familiar to you, some of them may not. Informed Consent Action Network, or ICAN, is one of the leading players now, along with Children's Health Defense. So ICAN is run by Del Bigtree, who you may recall from his movie Vaxxed and the Vaxxed bus that went around the country. He now runs an online show called The Highwire with Del Bigtree. It was recently deplatformed by YouTube, so you can no longer see it on YouTube, but they did just cut a deal with Roku. So if you have a Roku, which I feel very fancy, we do have a Roku now, that we are able to unfortunately watch on the Roku channel now. Children's Health Defense is run by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I'm sure you're all familiar with in this space. And then we also have Physicians for Informed Consent and the Canary Party. The Canary Party and Health Choice actually are run by the same two people, Jennifer Larson and Mark Blaxall. Physicians for Informed Consent is basically every doctor you've ever heard speak out against vaccines. They've all come together. The oldest player, actually, though, in the anti-vaccine movement is the National Vaccine Information Center. They have been around since the early 1980s. They were formed by a group of parents who believed that their children had been injured by the whole cell pertussis vaccine. And they have, in the intervening years, claimed that vaccines cause everything from allergies, asthma, ADHD, to HIV. So they're all over the map. And then Focus for Health is a relatively new player. They were originally called Focus for Autism. And they are some of the other people that you might have seen in the Vaxxed movie, if you've seen that. Brian Hooker, it's run by a gentleman named Barry Siegel out of New Jersey, who is a particularly wealthy individual. This line is dotted. It used to be solid, and that's on purpose. So there used to be a pretty clear division between the traditional players, NVIC, and the newer players, ICAN, Children's Health Defense, et cetera. The division was really an ideological point. You know, the players on the left-hand side of the slide believed in this idea of informed consent. So this idea that parents somehow need more information before they can decide whether or not to vaccinate their children. Whereas the people on the right felt that the way to go is more parental rights. Regardless of how much information you have, it should be up to the parent whether or not they choose to vaccinate their child. So basically, no state elimination of non-medical exemptions. That has changed in the past year, just recently, beginning in the fall of last year. So in the fall of last year, people have said, people have realized that parent rights is really where this movement is going. And so along those lines, at the end of last year, in October or November, I believe it was, there was a big rally in Washington, D.C. with all of the groups focused that you see listed here. It was started by a group that's now defunct. It was called Crazy Mothers. And the woman who was in charge of that, unfortunately, had to move, went through a divorce and other personal issues, and had to dissolve the group. But she, for the first time, brought together the leader of NVIC, Barbara Loe Fisher, who is located just outside of Washington, D.C., and the leaders of the other organizations. We suspect there is some sort of meeting of the minds that happens leading up to, during, or after that, because now there's a little show, anti-vaccine show, headed through the Midwest, and all of them are represented in many of those speaking opportunities, including NVIC. So what's happening in Ohio specifically? In Fort Choice, Ohio, which is one of the local outlets of the bigger groups, they usually align with ICANN. It's relatively new in Ohio, so it started last fall around the same time as this big rally. And they're doing what a lot of the anti-vaccine groups are doing now, which is posting a mix of anti-vaccine messages, but also anti-mask, anti-lockdown, and a variety of other conspiracy theories. So they're really broadening their audience, which we'll get to a little bit later. But what's really interesting to watch is this Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom. So in the past, medical freedom has meant no vaccines. But again, with COVID, what they've managed to do is they've managed to really expand their base, really expand their audiences beyond the hardcore anti-vaxxers and into people who have questions about what's happening during COVID, have concerns, and several other groups that are less savory that we will get to. So, you know, OAMF doesn't just focus on what's happening in Ohio, but also pulls in what's happening across the country, so that people feel like they're not only plugged into what's happening locally, but nationally. And perhaps most importantly, it's a 501c4. So that means that they can support political candidates, unlike a 501c3. So, you know, with 42,000 likes and a 501c4, I would suspect if you're not already seeing these guys playing in this year's election, that they'll certainly be playing in future years. So how do they all communicate? A lot of it is through social media. Not everything's new, you know, newfangled. It's not just Del Big on his weekly show. You know, it's newsletters, old-fashioned newsletters. Children's Health Defense sends out at least one newsletter a week. Barbara Loe Fisher is regularly sending out newsletters, regularly posting new videos to their website. But what's interesting is there tends to be some coordination on what messages they're going to push. And we see those messages really take off in social media within, I would say, 24 hours or less of somebody posting it, whether it's a Children's Health Defense email or it's the High Wire show. Within 24 hours, we will see on our Facebook page, on our Twitter feeds, on Instagram, those messages being parroted in our comments. So they really have their audiences and their channels down pat online. And how are they funded? This obviously isn't cheap, what they're doing. So, you know, a bunch of investigative journalists have begun to look into this issue, and they found a couple of different avenues. The main one is wealthy individual donors, by either directly or through their foundations. So the two individuals pictured here, Lisa and Bernard Sells, they run the Sells Foundation, and they have been a major donor to Andrew Wakefield's film efforts over the past decade plus. And they are the primary funder of the Informed Consent Action Network. So, for example, I believe ICANN had $1.4 million in 2018, and I believe 1.2 of that came from the Sells Foundation. Other wealthy individuals, for example, Barry Siegel, who runs Focus for Health, he himself is individually wealthy, so he funds his own foundation and doesn't have to worry about where his next paycheck or his next donation is coming from. The other big source is owners of alternative medicine companies, and again, they're foundations. So Dr. Mercola, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, he sells many supplements online, many alternative treatments, and he is a major funder through his foundation of the National Vaccine Information Center. And in fact, the Washington Post, when they found this connection and wrote about this connection, they noted a video in which Barbara Loe Fisher said that NVIC was on the verge of shutting down, and Dr. Mercola basically saved them with his donations. And then finally, chiropractors. Now, chiropractors are very much a mixed bag. There are great chiropractors out there who understand where their training and expertise begins and ends. But there are also chiropractors out there that believe that chiropractic can solve any problem, that they can, get rid of cancer, that they are a legitimate, they're legitimate alternatives to immunization. So the gentleman posted here, Billy DeMoss, he has an annual event out in California. It's sessions for chiropractors during the day on alternative health, and then in the evening it's a rock concert. And they raise a lot of money. So there was a photo circulating online of a $500,000 check that they gave to Children's Health Defense a couple of years ago when they chose Children's Health Defense as their primary charity, as their charity for that year. So they are well funded. Oftentimes they have more money than the pro-vaccine groups like Vaccinate Your Family. Now, what does this look like when they come to your state? This is, on the left, a picture of the first big coordinating effort that they did back in 2015 during, during SB 276 in California. So when California proposed getting rid of non-medical exemptions, this was their first opportunity to really coalesce and figure out how are we going to push back against this. And they had good crowds. They had them amped up. You can see right in the middle, Del Bigtree came out, RK Jr. came out. Both of them live in the state of California, at least part-time. I believe Del Bigtree has since moved, but this was personal for them as well as professional. It was intimidating to the legislators, for sure. It was intimidating to the pro-vaccine advocates. I mean, there were a lot more people out there advocating against vaccines than there were for. And, we understand that. If you believe that your child has been injured, you would stop at nothing to stop, whatever you felt had happened to your child. So it's a passionate group of people. But in the past year, on the heels of the measles outbreak, it really has shifted quite a bit. So as you may know, at the beginning of 2019, Maine eliminated their non-medical exemptions. And then in the heels of the measles outbreak, New York moved very quickly to remove their non-medical exemptions. And when I say very quickly, I mean none of us had any heads up, pro or anti, that they were going to move as quickly as they did. Every year in New York, they always introduced two competing bills. There was one that wanted to expand non-medical exemptions, and there was one that wanted to eliminate non-medical exemptions, and neither one ever went anywhere. They never moved. And so all of a sudden, we had heard that there was going to be hearing on removing non-medical exemptions, and I got a call the afternoon that hearing was supposed to happen. Not only have they moved it, they also moved it through the Assembly quickly. So that took us all off guard. So then when New Jersey introduced legislation to remove all medical exemptions following on what New York did, it all broke loose, right? There were cries of, we cannot let New Jersey fall. We cannot let what's happened in New York, what's happened in Maine, California, we cannot let another state go down that path. And so there was a larger than ever effort to get people to New Jersey. So when you looked at those crowds, I don't know if any of you had a chance to see them, they were several hundred strong, possibly even 1,000 at times. Those were not all New Jerseyans. A lot of those folks were from out of state, and you could actually see them. You could actually see people that you recognize from California, from Oregon, from New York, et cetera, all in New Jersey. And they knew exactly where to stand outside that building to make the most noise, to actually disrupt the legislative process that was happening inside. They could be heard in the chambers. And people reported that they were screaming, and not just screaming, not my child or my choice, screaming at the top of their lungs like they were being murdered. And they camped out. So there was a very limited time period at the end of session that the Senate announced that they would be trying to push this legislation through on one of those days. And they sat out there. RFK Jr. actually kicked it off, and they sat out there for, I think it was 3 or 4, maybe even 5 days. Very well organized, porta potties, warming stations, because obviously a lot of them brought their children. It was January in New Jersey, so it was cold, but very well organized. And the legislation ultimately was not voted on. It wasn't voted down. It was not voted on. They were 1 vote short in the Senate. And so the antis really took that as, we did it, we won, right? We intimidated them into not passing this legislation, not voting on this legislation. And now the rallying cry is, let's do it Jersey style. So a couple of months ago, Colorado had a bill to tighten exemptions. So it wasn't eliminating them in any way, shape, or form, but it was certain requirements. Who could sign the exemption form, how often it had to be signed, the fact that it would have to be signed every year, that there would have to be a list of which vaccines were included, pretty basic stuff that many states already have in place. And they did it New Jersey style, projecting messages onto the Capitol. And the one consistency across all of these bills from the beginning has been the intimidation of legislators and their staff, the death threats. There was a senator who was willing to sign on to the bill in New Jersey. He was supposed to be the final vote, and they just went after him. They went after his wife. They went after his wife's sister who had passed when they were much younger. I mean, it gets very, very brutal. So know that you're super excited to be working on this. Let me make you even more excited about this topic. So I mentioned at the top of this presentation that there are non-traditional partners who are joining their voices to this. And when I say non-traditional partners, I mean they call them far right, but they're beyond the right. They're beyond far right. We're talking militias, white nationalists like the Proud Boys. These folks, we can see, so we spoke to a gentleman who follows these groups through his foundation. And what he told us is that in every single one of their social media groups, there's now a conversation happening about vaccines. So they're anti-government, they're anti-mask, they're anti-lockdown, they're anti-vaccine. So this is concerning. And actually, if you look at this protest, so this was some of the Texas protests around whether or not the government would shut down. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of that photo, you'll see a bunch of black signs with white and red lettering. Those are actually anti-vaccine signs developed by a gentleman, Joshua Coleman, in California, who started a group called Vias for Vaccine. Those are his signs. And so in an anti-lockdown protest, at least a quarter of the crowd is anti-vaccine. And we saw that repeated across the country. And in fact, as lockdown protests continued at capitals, more and more of the protesters had anti-vaccine signs. So they're definitely getting their message across. But we can do the same thing. I think for too long, we have really focused on the medical groups. How do we get the medical groups to speak out? But I think we need to get much broader than that. And I think we need to help people understand what's actually happening and being said out there. I joke that this is an actual photo of me, but this is an actual photo of me. I mean, every time I go online, every time I'm on social media, they said, what? I mean, I'm putting together currently a cheat sheet for legislative staff that lays out some of the myths that you'll hear online that constituents and non-constituents may call you with, and helping you understand whether there's any truth behind that statement. One of the statements I have to include is, no, Bill Gates is aspiring to kill off the world population. I have to say that, right? It's sort of unbelievable. And so I just want to make sure that all of you and anyone that you talk to or who is thinking of becoming an advocate has access to the real science-based information. You have some great resources in Ohio. So I'm sure most of you are already following Ohio AAP. If you're not, please do. And then I also have some websites and some newsletters that I think are very much worth your time. Obviously, Vaccinate Your Family, we have an extensive library of questions and FAQs, but if you have the time, please do go to Voices for Vaccines and sign up for their weekly vaccine hesitancy newsletter. What that does is it pulls out the myths that have been circulating online that week and debunks them for you in a really simple, easy to understand way. I can't say enough about their Friday newsletter. So if you have time, definitely sign up for that. And we'll be sharing these slides, of course. So if you haven't gotten a screenshot of this, I'm sure you'll be able to get it later. But now is the time to expand beyond the usual medical partners and really figure out who are our non-traditional partners that we need to bring to the table. I think the first key here is to identify who the unique influencers are in your community. The first question to ask yourself is, who's at risk of not vaccinating? I think what we learned beginning in the measles outbreak, and many of you already knew this because you are at the community level, was that it's the groups who don't trust the government or who feel separate from the communities around them. So we saw that in Minnesota, in Hennepin County with the Somali American population. They had been targeted 10 or so years ago by Wakefield, Andrew Wakefield, and others who had seen this, this spike in cases of autism in the Somali population. So children in that Somali community were being diagnosed with autism at a higher rate than other populations in Hennepin County. And so while the research was being done to see if that was a real signal, what that signal meant, Wakefield's in there having, closed door meetings with the imams, telling them, I know what's happening, it's the MMR vaccine, you need to stop vaccinating. And that was incredibly effective because the imams are incredibly influential within that community. And so when they say to their people, stop vaccinating, they stop vaccinating. So think about who are those communities that are at risk and who influences those communities. Is it a religious leader? Is it a school principal? Here where I am, I'm based out in rural Pennsylvania. I can think of two gentlemen. There's a retired football coach from a local community who is very well respected, and there's a current wrestling coach that everybody sort of looks to in the community. So for me, my first step would be to sit those two gentlemen down and say, hey, did you get your flu shot this year? Why? Why not? Have you been telling people to get your flu shot? Have you been talking to your teams about it? Have you been talking about to your team players' families? How can we start building these individuals as somebody who understands the importance of vaccines and then wants to share it? And also, where do they go? So, for example, I was just talking to somebody out in Wisconsin who has done the importance of brain health, 0 through 5 years. She has gone to corner stores in Milwaukee because that's where the population she's trying to reach is. So, think about if you're in a city, is it some corner stores, is it that cashier that everybody knows and likes and talks to and, just talks to in the community every year? Give me a second, honey. And then, how do you influence them? Where are the influencers going for their information? Is it a national organization, state level organization? So for example, NAAP on the national level very much supports vaccines. They want to, but on the local level, Colorado, NAACP does not support vaccines, right? So we also have to understand if we're talking about an organization that's effective, how are they interacting with a partner? That sounds all good, fine, but how do you actually start these conversations? I know that many of you have probably been asked people who don't believe in vaccines. And so I think, it's really important to know how to start conversations in a way that you're comfortable, that they're also comfortable. I have people within my family who are not supportive of vaccines. And so I have learned how to navigate those conversations with them in a way that doesn't get anybody angry or upset. It's for those of you who are familiar with motivational interviewing, it's taking that out of the offices and into the streets, essentially. So just because the main thing to remember here is just because not everyone is 100% confident in vaccines doesn't mean they don't want to be confident in vaccines, right? They want the information. It's totally normal to ask questions about vaccines. I mean, who wouldn't in today's day and age? We ask questions about, the 50 different brands of car seats that we investigate before we actually buy our. So asking questions doesn't mean they're opposed to it. And so you can start questions. So I have people, I don't want to come in and say and debate with you, but where you're coming from. Why are you not getting your flu shot this year? Why didn't you get your daughter HPV? Just walk me through what you're thinking and where have you heard that from? And then always sort of, within that, leave an opportunity to follow up. Well, I heard the HPV vaccine causes ovarian failure. Really? Okay, let me look into that and let me get you a source. And then you can send them, go back to one of the websites that we provided, send them that information and say, what are your thoughts on this? Is this convincing to you? Why isn't it if it's not? Why is it if it is? And it just continues with folks. And then finally, when they're ready, when you're ready, the ultimate goal is to get these individuals to the table, right? We want to be making policy with influencers at the table who can tell us, this is what my community needs. in a policy. This is what we need to hear about. This is what we need to be able to do. I cannot say enough about getting people to the policy making table, right? Because then it's really inclusive. Then people can see, okay, that's somebody that I trust who's been a part of this process, and I can trust the process now, not just the ultimate outcome, which is the vaccine recommendation. And part of this is talking about vaccines everywhere. I know everybody says, oh, you gotta be on Facebook, you gotta be on Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah. That's great if you're comfortable with that. If you want to be a tweetiotrician, fantastic. But our founders, former First Lady Rosalind Carter and former First Lady of Arkansas Betty Bumpers, social media didn't exist when they did this. They went state by state by state talking to people about the importance of vaccines, helping to build immunization coalitions from the ground up. I mean, those didn't exist in the 70s when they started. They started with vaccine requirements, and then they branched out in the 90s, post the last major measles outbreak, into immunization coalitions, really communicating about the value of vaccines. So go where you're comfortable. It could be at, you know, my boss talks all the time to people at her son's hockey games. She's convinced people to vaccinate, particularly with HPV at hockey games, you know? It's a matter of people are curious. And so we shouldn't be so hesitant to talk about it because I think we can have real calm conversations about vaccines when we're willing to open up about it. So you can do it. This is your ultimate slide of motivation. I've got cats, I've got dogs, I've got babies, I've got pop culture. You can do this. And more importantly, we need you to do this because we're never going to be able to create a culture of immunization unless we have as many voices out there as humanly possible. Most people do vaccinate. Most people understand that vaccines are important. We need to help them find a voice and feel comfortable sharing that voice. So with that, I'd love to spend the bulk of my time here just talking to you guys. What have you seen? What are your questions or concerns? How can I help you? I mean, part of my job at Vaccinate Your Family, most of my job, is to develop the tools and resources that you guys all need to make your lives easier and your jobs easier. So with that, I will pause and I will ask if there are any questions, and I'll try and figure out how to get to the chat box in case people can't unmute.
Sure. Thanks, Erica. This is Lori. I can check the chat box as well. Feel free to unmute and ask Erica any questions, or if you're more comfortable using the chat box, please do so. But thank you so much, Erica. That was such great information, and we have a little bit of time left, so we'd love to open it up.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the main, kind of anti-vax message that is out there? I know we talked about the people, but what is the message that they're saying? Is it about liberty? Is it about being afraid that something else might happen to the child? What is the main concern at this point that they're focusing on?
It depends on the community. So vaccines cause autism is still one of the main arguments. That's still out there very much. But yes, also liberty, the right to choose. The idea that this is my child, or in some cases, this is my body for healthcare workers, and I should be able to decide what goes in it, not the government. That is the message that's very much appealing to these non-traditional partners, this down with the government type of thinking. And conspiracy theories. This idea that there's a conspiracy between CDC and the pharmaceutical companies, and Bill Gates now is wrapped into it. And I think all of the confusion that's coming out of the CDC right now is not helping that situation, particularly with COVID vaccine. So I think that message is probably going to get stronger in the coming months.
And we do have a question in the chat box from Samantha. She asked, what was the weekly resource about vaccines misinformation in social media?
Voices for Vaccines, so voicesforvaccines.org. They can sign up. You can sign up there on their website for that weekly email. It's fantastic. I really can't say enough good things about that.
I actually already get that, so I second that. That's a great resource for sure.
It is.
I have a question.
Okay.
What is your take on accommodating alternate vaccine schedules for families that are vaccine hesitant just to get the child vaccinated? Obviously, I'm going to recommend against an alternate schedule, but do you feel like that it's okay to kind of appease the family in some cases when you feel like it's your best resource in getting that child vaccinated?
I have seen immunization conferences devolve over this issue. There is no right answer. There is no one answer. I know pediatricians who firmly believe you should show them the door. I know pediatricians who firmly believe you should never show them the door, right? You are their best opportunity to get them vaccinated. And so I really do think it comes down to the individual doctor and your comfort level. If you are comfortable, if you think you can move this parent, and it's not putting your other patients at risk, by all means, vaccinate them according to the schedule that you and the patient feels appropriate. To the extent you can, I mean, obviously try and keep this a schedule. It really is the only tested schedule. I think a lot of people don't understand that the vaccines aren't just tested by themselves, but also in combination with the other vaccines they're given. Not many people understand the concept of concomitant studies. So to the extent that that's helpful, I think is great. Also, the other talking point that I tend to use with parents that's often effective is the cortisol studies. So cortisol levels do not increase between 1 shot and 2 shots and 3 shots. Children are stressed out as soon as you give them the vaccine. So you might as well get it all over with at once, right? It's actually easier on your child, at least from a stress point of view. So those are the messages that we try to use, but it's such a tough issue. And as I said, I've seen some really intense debates around it, and it does come down to the individual pediatrician. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful on that one.
Thanks, Erica. There is a question from Dr. Baldwin in the chat. She said, Erica, do you want to talk at all about how people can get help if they find themselves attacked online?
Yes, Dr. Baldwin knows this all too well, sadly. There are a couple of different ways. Yeah, a lot of people have been attacked, and it tends to happen online. If it happens online, there is a group on Facebook called Cicada, like the insect, CICADA, and they will provide support. So they can send comments your way, likes, etc. You can also sign up for a group called Shots Heard Round the World. That was started by a pediatrician out in Pittsburgh who was attacked, Dr. Todd Woolen. Kids Plus Pediatric, I believe, was his practice. And so they also will send out alerts to their listserv of people. But you can contact me. I'm very, very helpful, very happy rather, to put you in touch with any of those groups, any of those people. Post it in those groups themselves if you don't want to join, whatever I can do to help, because, it is scary when you start getting all the phone calls, all the emails, all the messages, the bad reviews. I mean, they will try and leave negative reviews on your Yelp page, on your Google pages, etc. And there are ways to get those taken down. It's not easy. Yelp is better about it than Google, but it can be done, and there are people who have done it before. And more importantly, there's just moral support for you out there. So, anytime at all, if I can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to connect you with those groups, and I'm sure Dr. Baldwin is as well.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and this may not be an easy one for Erica to answer, but I don't know if Melissa Warby-Arnold is on, but this may be one she could help answer. But what is the plan for addressing Ohio vaccine exemptions?
I'm on, so I will try to address that. So, it's a pretty complicated issue in Ohio. As you just heard, there's a lot of movement from the Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom, and they've been pretty successful at using a lot of scare tactics with our legislators. And I think they're pretty confused about this topic. They've been telling us they're sort of vaccine fatigued in terms of the fights we've had in the legislature, because every time we've tried to bring up anything around this topic, the calls flood in, they bombard the legislators, they bombard our offices, emails, texts, social media posts, etc. So what we are really working on doing is educating legislators right now during this time when they have a little bit of extra time, making sure that they understand the misconceptions around vaccines, and then also making sure that they understand some of why Ohio's laws in particular are causing us to have outbreaks as well as such low immunization rates. So, for example, we're one of only 15 states left that allow for a philosophical exemption. And you don't have to document that at all. You can just say I'm opting out. And only 7 other states allow for that. So, we're in a pretty bad position that way. We're trying to look at just some of those, what I would say are common sense changes to our vaccine laws to at least make sure that if you want to opt out, you have to document that you're really opting out. And so we've looked at, what they did up in Michigan, which was for them, they required them to go to the health department to opt out of vaccines. And in Ohio, we didn't think we could make them go to the health department, but we did say, you could go to anyone who's a vaccinator. So it could be the health department, it could be your pediatrician, your family physician, a nurse practitioner, in some situations even, a pharmacist, and allow them to basically sign out on that form. Because basically in Ohio, they're opting out without any kind of documentation. So, we need to make sure that if they're really opting out, they really are opting out, and that they are getting proper information and not just something they saw on the internet.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Melissa, when Melissa, when I'm done with that state legislator cheat sheet, I'll get that over to you in case it's helpful to some of the staff. The other thing we're working on that may or may not be helpful to you, because obviously you know your legislators already, we're doing something called legislator archetyping. So what it is you basically flow through a decision tree, and based on the questions, it tells you what your archetype is. So the legislator is a critic or a champion or an analyst or a pragmatist, and then it comes with a toolkit of talking points, recommended messengers, COVID-19 talking points, all that sort of stuff. So happy to share that with you too, if that's helpful.
That would be great.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Thank you.
We have another question in the chat box. Any specific tips for influenza vaccines?
Yeah. Flu vaccine. Oh, it's frustrating. Isn't it so frustrating? So the main thing that we hear across all of our audiences is the flu vaccine causes the flu. So we are just beating the drum this year to the extent that we can. We've got all new graphics coming out, social media graphics. We're working to reach communities of color, particularly African Americans, with the message that the flu vaccine cannot cause the flu. Oh, and by the way, you're not worried about yourself? Great, but how about you worry about grandma? Because what COVID-19 has taught people, which was surprising and fantastic, is this idea of herd immunity. So people actually understand this idea of I need to protect myself to protect others. And so really pushing that message as hard as we can. And then my final tip is families fighting flu. It's one thing to talk about the flu doesn't cause, flu vaccine doesn't cause flu. It's another thing to talk about protecting each other. It's yet another thing to show people otherwise healthy children, healthy adults who have succumbed to flu. I find families fighting flu to have really, really powerful stories. And so to the extent that we can share some of those, we definitely do. And oftentimes that does make a difference for folks.
Thanks, Erica. There was another question in the chat box. Can we receive a copy of the mentioned resources so we can talk to our legislators? Yes, one thing that we are working on right now is a vaccine-specific webinar for legislators. We can give them some vaccine basics. They're getting a ton of questions from their constituents. We want to arm them with evidence-based scientific information that they can utilize, as well as afterwards we're going to be sending some talking points and tips and things like that through our voter voice system, but we can also send to individuals who request it if you want to talk to them specifically. And one thing Dr. Baldwin mentioned is posting your flu shot selfie on social media and tag families fighting flu using the hashtag flu shot selfie. Here at Ohio AAP, we have a flu shot selfie page that we created. And so you can write on it why you get your flu shot. My daughters, we just got our flu shots, and one of my daughters, I posted it on social media. She got hers for her hamster because she wants to be well so she can take care of him. And then on the back of that sheet is a bunch of other tips about and really social media messaging around the flu. So just like Erica said, the flu shot can't give you the flu. Basic little kind of quick little quotes and information that you can post. So we did send that. It was not only through, I think Ohio Pediatrics, we posted it or put it in the actual information. So it was a tear out sheet, but we've also posted on social media as well as through Voter Voice. So if you want a copy of that sheet, I'm happy to email that out individually. But yes, please post your flu shot selfies. AAP recommends that everyone gets their flu vaccine by the end of October. So we still have plenty of time, but let's get it in there. I know there's we just had a conversation today about so many flu shots being given out. People are running out of supplies. So it's a good problem to have, and we will get more, and we will get everyone vaccinated. Another question, are there any YouTube-like videos or Mythbuster type videos, since I think often people don't read what we post or hand out?
Yes, that's a great point. So yes, people do not, here's an interesting fact. People don't read anymore, but they don't watch videos. They read the videos with the sound off. So I don't understand why they won't just read. They have to have a video playing in the background that they don't actually listen to. So any videos that you do, just a tip, always have them subtitled because most people do watch them without the sound off. But you are right that most people are not reading posts, and they're certainly not reading handouts. It used to be that you could at least bullet point it and people would read it, but not so much anymore. So if you go to any of the major groups, Vaccinate Your Family has several explainer videos. We have them with Dr. Sawyer, Mary Beth Kozlowski-Tracko, who's a nurse practitioner, Allison Singer from Autism Science Foundation, and others talking through some of the basic myths and facts. So those are available. We also have a couple of advocate videos. So 5 individuals who have been personally affected by vaccine-preventable diseases, a mother from Indiana who lost her daughter to whooping cough, a woman out in California who lost her sister to flu, et cetera. Those have been pretty powerful and pretty well shared online. So definitely check those out. Voices for Vaccines has some really incredible explainer videos. They're the animated type, which are awesome. It keeps people moving through it. And then local groups too. So Vaccinate Texas, for example, or Immunize Texas, pardon me. Immunize Texas just did a really fabulous one on the vaccine court, because a lot of questions come up around, oh, they paid out $4 billion. Is that true? Vaccines must be dangerous. They did a really fantastic one breaking down the numbers and the facts around that. So definitely check out the Immunization Coalition. Immunization Action Coalition also has some really great explainer videos, I think. Yes, they do. So there's a lot out there once you start digging through it that I think you'll find helpful.
That looks like the last question in the chat box. If anyone else wants to go off mute and ask a question, or feel free again to post in the chat box. All right, if there are no more questions, we would like to thank Erica again for taking time to chat with us here in Ohio about vaccine hesitancy and everything going on in the state. We, again, will have this recorded. We are recording currently, but we will post it, upload it, and send you all the link. Everyone that registered, obviously people got taken away for different events and different things at the office, so hopefully everyone can watch the recording. But thank you again, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.